All right.
It's all yours, Tisha.
Thank you. I call the meeting to order. I'm Tisha Tallman, and the statement to read is the Housing First Subcommittee meeting has now commenced. It is July 25th at 4 p.m. This meeting is being held virtually due to COVID-19 to allow for social distancing and to protect the public's health. As we continue our efforts of meeting remotely, we ask all commissioners and guests to mute yourselves until called upon to speak to avoid feedback and background noise. For those who have dialed in using the call-in number to unmute to speak, dial *6 on your phone. Also, prior to speaking, please announce who you are to identify yourself. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded. We ask that you only use the chat function to request to speak or to announce that you are leaving the meeting so that we can track quorum. Also, to comply with the state open meeting law, attendance and votes will be done by way of roll call using audio, not by using the chat function. So with that, we'll go ahead and do roll call. Tisha Tallman here. Mark Clark.
Mark, you're muted.
Looks like you might be frozen.
Yeah, he is frozen too, yes.
Wendy Asher.
Present.
And Minnie Birdstein is absent with excuse. And we can note that Mark Clark is here. He just appears to be frozen at the moment. With that, I believe that roll call is complete. Now it's time for a call to the audience.
Mark has dropped out, Tisha. Let's see if he comes back in.
Okay. Let's give it a moment here and then we'll request a call to audience again once he's back on.
Sure. Does anyone want to talk about rain?
There we go. He's
there
back.
he is. Okay, no rain.
It's too hot.
It makes the title of a nice song.
Yeah.
Okay, I see, Joe, you have a comment in the chat. Would you like to unmute and compliment us verbally?
Oh, I hoped I'd gotten to it all, but yeah, I know I had kind of pestered Neto about some of the Zoom links in the past not working, and for the past couple months, I don't think I've had a problem with it. So, yeah, I want to say thanks. It's, you know, I like that. You know, we get to have the option of being here virtually. I appreciate it, and I appreciate the work that's gone into it from our people at HCD. So, thanks.
Great, thank you, Joe. Any other audience members would like to make any comments or have any questions? Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and proceed down the agenda. Housing First update, and in lieu of Brandy Champion, I believe that Austin is going to provide an update for us.
Oh, I was here to do a whole presentation on Housing First in general.
Okay, you
So
have the floor.
Oh, go ahead and get started. Alrighty. Let me share my screen and give a little context.
And just
Okay.
quickly, Austin did share
Yeah.
this with us, the committee through email.
Yes. So thanks for having me. This to a little bit of context. I received a whole bunch of emails from Jason asking if I would be able to come and present to this committee. And in going through the emails, it was pretty clear, and they were very direct questions asked. So my presentation, the title and most of the slides are from those emails, and I'm gonna try my best to deliver what I believe was. So today's presentation is about the housing crisis in our community and assessing the scale of it and matching it to the scope of the work that will be needed. And these lovely words come from essentially the commission, like doing that in a way that brings imagination, vision, and advocacy that results in serious and effective solutions. So this is not a very big slide deck because it was reading those questions, it seemed more like this needs to be a meaningful dialogue that goes back and forth. And so I'm hoping to do that and capture some notes that can move into action, because I believe that was the goal of having this presentation. So we'll do some introduction and context setting, and then we're just have a little I just did that part, this little overview, and set some expectations in the next slide, and then move into understanding why that was the main question that was posed. And then do some visioning for the future and wrap up with some next steps on how to move our work forward. So introduction and context setting. I'm Austin Puka, she, her pronouns. I'm the Human Services Manager here with PCD. But I think the most important part for context setting would be to share with y'all that I am a person of lived experience of homelessness in this community. And so I really, the question that was asked in the emails that I read said that this commission, and starting here at the subcommittee, would like information and insight about why the homeless population has it, and the direct quote was exploded, and why so many remain unhoused. And in that email, the goal, it said, was to see how y'all could move into advancing recommendations or doing actionable work that would result in housing equity and housing justice. And what I picked out as being objectives for me to hopefully lead the committee with was to understand the root causes of the homeless experience in our community, and to understand barriers to then solving that crisis, given that we do have resources and really dedicated service providers in the community, and then identify some actionable steps towards like removing those barriers and responding to the crisis. I'm a big like shared understanding person, so I sent materials ahead of this meeting, and I appreciate the grace. It wasn't with the most ample time, but before we really like jump into the presentation, I want to share a video. It's only 2.5 minutes, but I also think before you get started, you got to kind of take off the hat of what you might have been doing just before you came here. So that sharing this will put us on the same page and hopefully put us all wearing the same hat. So I'm gonna swap my screen share here. And make sure I push all the right buttons so you're able to hear what I'm wanting to share.
Domestic violence, homelessness, addiction.
Can y'all hear this video? Okay.
Poverty. Too often people in communities who face multiple complex challenges are seen as a list of problems. So we create programs to fix the problems. As a country, we spend $500 billion a year on problem-centered safety net programs. And for a lot of people, they do the trick. But for people at the deep end of the deep end, progress made in one program can be quickly undone by what it takes to make progress in another. Like a new job placement that becomes out of reach when someone has to move to a shelter across the state. It's a harmful merry-go-round of short-term progress without long-term gains. Truly breaking cycles of poverty, violence, and trauma means seeing people and families and communities, not problems, at the center. It means remembering, first and foremost, that people are people, and recognizing that we all share the same fundamental needs. What the Full Frame Initiative calls the 5 domains of well-being: social connectedness, stability, safety, mastery, meaningful access to relevant resources. We don't meet our needs in these domains one by one. They build on each other. We're safer when we're more connected to other people. With more mastery, we can access resources better. What it means to be safe, or stable, or connected depends a lot on our personal history and background, but the research is clear. We all need to have assets in all 5 domains to thrive, and we're driven try to meet our needs in these 5 domains of well-being as best we can given our circumstances. Because each of the 5 domains is equally important, we all steer away from choices that may help us in one domain but extract too great a cost in another, like taking a promotion, if it means uprooting a child who's finally found a school where she isn't bullied. Systems and services that help people make progress that lasts do so by helping them to build on their assets and minimize trade-offs among the 5 domains. This isn't about doing everything for everyone. It means using an approach that, for example, supports someone facing violence to become safer without eroding all her social connections or her financial stability. Imagine if more community-based programs and government systems worked this way. More people, more communities could move from surviving to thriving. A few organizations and government agencies around the country are leading the way. With the Full Frame Initiative's help, they're using the 5 domains of well-being to put people at the center and help people make change that lasts. See things differently. Help others see things differently. Send them this video, tell them about the 5 domains of well-being.
All right, y'all. Thank you for sitting through that video with me, and it connects some of the materials that I sent to y'all. And so the materials that I sent were in the feedback. It said we don't need you to give us a bunch of data. You do that every time, and we don't necessarily want you to drill down on the particulars of how you deliver a program or the particulars of the programs y'all deliver. That being said, this is the Housing First Committee, and Housing First is like an evidence-based intervention that many of the providers in our community are and have been working to strengthen their understanding and then implement it. And I thought being able as a subcommittee to have a shared understanding of what that really is and what it entails and some of the barriers just within being a Housing First provider would include. So if you haven't had the chance yet to look at the attachments that were emailed, let me know, because we can always pop over to that and look at it. But some of the things that it brings to light are really that everything needs to be person-centered, right? So I started by mentioning that I'm a person of lived experience. And one of the things that I was hired by the city to implement youth housing, and I moved here as a homeless young person. I'm almost 40 years old, in case anybody was wondering. That's a long time. So I moved here when I was about 9, and until I ran away at 17, I experienced homelessness like over a dozen times. I've lived in like 48 different places in this community alone. And having delivered and been a service provider for over a decade, many of the barriers that my family experienced moving here in the late 90s haven't necessarily resolved. And I do believe that video stating that focused on the problem rather than shifting towards the folks that are experiencing that problem is largely why we haven't fully moved a needle. And we're a little bit disconnected. So I'm grateful to be here and hopefully connect us a little bit better. That video was kind of speaking to equity versus equality. And I think we've all seen different graphics, and I think sometimes seeing graphics in different ways helps folks to really like hammer down that understanding. What I was basically asked to come present about is where does the inequality lie, right? So clearly we have resources within our community, like millions of dollars. We subrecipient it out to lots of really wonderful and dedicated, committed agencies, advocates, right? For-profit, right? Developers, folks that are really wanting to know how do we address the issue. But then you think about equity, right? And equity is making sure it's kind of fair, everyone gets it. So you got $11 million, everybody gets a piece of that pie. But what if everybody is not actually able to digest pie, or they're allergic to something in the pie, right? Equity is only as great as the folks that are going to be able to access it. So you want to move to equality, and that is, that's equality. You want to move to equity, right? Because equal would be fair, but equity is giving folks what they need, right? So I am technically allergic to peanuts, and if I was starving and the lovely Mark Clark offered me a peanut butter sandwich and I said no, right? He could think you're not really that hungry, or you take the sandwich. But if the sandwich is going to literally harm me, then maybe ask me that and offer me something that is going to serve the intention of meeting my need of hunger, right? And then justice is exactly what y'all are aiming to do, is to find out what are those barriers and what are the sustainable changes that fix and address the root to systemic cause. So just making sure we're all on the same page of what we're trying to do here. So really, I just want to jump into understanding the why. The question that was in the email said, we all know that homelessness in Tucson is a humanitarian crisis, and that government and nonprofits are doing what they can. Why is that not enough? I mean, I think any of us that have done services, been in services, probably unmute and get a whole list. The first thing I want to show you is this. And what you're looking at is the fair market rent standards that are established by the federal government. That gives us money to then give out into the community to be administered to hopefully solve homelessness. So, right, what you're looking at is the rent standards that the monies that we give out to the community are allowed to be. This is how much you can spend to place someone into housing. And right, when we look at this, we see that an efficiency, so like a single room occupancy, right, a 1-bedroom, $893. I do not know about you, but I have not seen a 1-bedroom for $893 in probably over 2 years, right? In the materials I sent you, and it talks about affordable housing, it says that clients are not required to pay more than 30% of their income for their housing costs, would be like the definition, right, of it being affordable. If I will use my family, right, I have 2 children, a husband. Right now, I live in a 4-bedroom home. The payment standard for a 4-bedroom is $1,955. 30% of my income is $500 under that, right? And I have like gainful employment. If we're thinking of someone that's making $15 an hour and working full time, right? 30% of their income is not even a 1-bedroom or an efficiency unit, right? So if we're working with clients, some of them that don't have income, right? They're not connected to healthcare, and you have providers trying to fit the dollars that they have been given into, right, a box of dollars into a round hole of what is federally allowable. So I think one of the main things that lets us understand why funding is rolling in, agencies are pivoting and updating policies, and they're doing what they can to increase salaries of the folks that they are trying to support to go and do the work. But the dollars that they are given and allocated have such rigid and strict requirements at the federal level. State and local governments can only do so much, right? And then we are a local government. We have state requirements. So our state doesn't permit us to do rent control or anything to combat that. We are only allowed to spend a certain amount of money to be compliant and then not later be fined and have to give all the money back to the feds in order to effectively utilize the money we've been given. So when we do point in time counts and housing inventory counts, and we say, why are you underutilized, provider? And why don't you have all the people in your unit? Oftentimes it's not for not trying, right? And people aren't being placed quickly because they are searching for the needle that is gonna be a 1-bedroom unit that's $893 in the haystack of 1-bedroom units that are mostly around $1,400 in our community. That's just one tiny example. I'm gonna pause. I see a hand raised.
Yeah, thanks, Austin. I just have a question because we do have on the agenda that this was to be a Housing First update. And you stated that you're responding to some emails, but I want to clarify whether the emails were from a subcommittee member or, because I'm not aware of the emails. So I want to make sure we just proper notice to folks.
Yes, so I was on a string of emails that included Brandy Brandy Champion, Jason Thorpe, Neto was on a couple of them, but only towards the end, and Jay Young. And it was a back and forth. I had maybe like 9 emails or something attached to them. And when I sent the stuff out, Neto called me saying, "Why'd you send them to Jay?" I said, "Because that's the only context I was given." So if this isn't what you were expecting to receive, like totally understand it. I'm a little bit confused myself.
Okay. Yeah, well, Jay, I know Jay is the our vice chair for the larger committee or the larger commission.
Yes.
He's not a part of this committee unless I'm missing something, Mark or Wendy. And the question wasn't posed by a subcommittee member. I think your presentation is wonderful and I think it has a context, but I'd like to make sure that it's on the agenda to give proper public notice to make sure there are everyone that wants to hear this, which I think is worthy of more participation, that we give the proper notice. So my thought, Mark and Wendy, is that we have to conclude this because notice wasn't given of this. The Housing First update that I put on the agenda was the one that Brandy gave last time, but we didn't have quorum. So she started giving her presentation. We had to stop. And we were, some of the staff was checking on whether or not we had quorum. We were trying to finalize the participants. And so once we figured out that we didn't have quorum, we just put an end to it. So everything that was on last agenda, we just placed back on this agenda.
Yep. No, I get it. I completely get it.
Okay.
If I might, just to make sure that when I got called by Neto, I don't want to mess up anything that's going to help y'all move your committee. I get it from the continuum. Everything starts and ends at a committee and processes and whatnot. Neto explained to me that today's presentation, the reason I was doing it at the subcommittee level first is so that the subcommittee could see it, give feedback, because it was ultimately supposed to go to the full commission. But they didn't want to just bring in a presentation there if it wasn't what was needed. I'm happy to do this somewhere else or get like whatever is needed of the committee and or subcommittee.
No, we'd love to have you be a part of this committee if it was something to vet prior to going to the larger commission. The only problem I see potentially is that I'm not so sure we were specific enough on our agenda item for us to have given proper notice.
Totally.
To the public. Ernesto, Mark, Wendy, any thoughts on that?
Let me go like this so that we can see everybody. Okay.
Hi, Tisha. Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Austin. I too was a little confused. I was out for several weeks since your last meeting. And when I came back, I saw some emails. And so, yeah, a little confusion on my part, and I apologize. Last week when I sent out the agenda. So no finger pointing on my part here, or you can just point it at me. That's all right. But yes, Tisha, you're correct. This item was not really fully publicized because Brandy's on the agenda and not Austin. And in my mind, I was thinking this could be Brandy's presentation, if you will. It's about housing first or homelessness. So, but I mean, I'm comfortable if Austin's comfortable. Brandy is here. So we can just stop it at this point. So again, my apologies.
Well, I just want to confirm with Wendy, I'm fine for us to go forward as long as the commission members of the subcommittee think that this was appropriate notice to folks. Mark?
This is my first committee meeting of this committee, and the first committee I've been able to be at of any committee in a long time. So I don't have I really don't know. I don't have a sense of that. It's not quite what I was thinking, because I was expecting to talk a little more about housing first policy specifically. And I tend to be a little bit of a stickler on open meeting stuff as well, although not, I believe you're more of one than I am, Tisha, so.
I'm not a part of a committee, but I'm pretty stickler on committees, and I agree. And for what it's worth, my presentation is going to get to housing first, but the point of it is to help folks understand like really what housing first is, because I do think that folks don't really quite understand it, and that is our trouble. And so if y'all want me to come back and finish this presentation so that it does help y'all with like actionable items, all the policy in the world and rereading it won't necessarily help if the different folks that the people that we house interact with don't understand. So your advocacy is needed from all sorts of angles. With Brandy being here, I think it's valuable for her to deliver her presentation. And if y'all want to invite me back at a different time,
Let's just get Wendy's. I appreciate that, Austin. Let's get Wendy's thoughts.
Yeah, Tisha, thank you for bringing that up. I wasn't even thinking in those terms, and I think that we do have an obligation to adhere to the rules. Although at the same time, I think what Austin is presenting is really valuable. So I would love for her to come back or do a presentation for the whole commission, because I think definitions and understanding of what housing first means in its broader context and what the city is able to do and what might be actionable items is really key to what we do as a commission. So I'm sorry to have Austin show up and us go, not now, but if that's where we land, and I'm in the same boat as Marcus, this is my first time at this is only my second time at one of the meetings because didn't have the proper link the last time. So, I'll defer to what you, Tisha, and Nesto think is proper.
Well, let's go ahead. Brandy's present. Brandy, if you want to say a few words.
Sure. I mean, do you guys want to just hear some words or do you want to see some visuals? Because I can do both. So, and I have a short slide presentation about what we've done in our first 18, 19 months in Housing First.
Yeah, and I think Brandy, this agenda item was just from the last agenda item, and you started giving us your update if you didn't even completely finish it, but we did have quorum, so I put it back on the agenda to make sure that others had an opportunity once we had quorum to hear your presentation. So
Okay.
why don't we do that? I think, Austin, it would be best. I'd sure like more people to have the opportunity to hear what you're saying, Austin. Whether the full commission wants that and or we do, you're invited to ours. I'd love to put you back on our agenda, Austin, for next time. I just want to make sure we have the opportunity. I see that there are only 2 public members on this particular link, and I think you might bring in extra additional interest if we do put it on the next agenda. Is that okay with everybody? I hear no opposition. Mark, Wendy?
That sounds fine.
Okay, let's do that. Austin, thank you so much. I'm sorry, I wish I would have known in advance and we wouldn't have had you begin, but what you have presented is of interest to the entire commission, but certainly we'd love you to be a part of our commission and provide additional information at the next meeting.
Right. Well, just let me know, depending on when that next meeting is. It is the Continual of Cares funding cycle, and I have to run that. So
Thank you, Austin.
have a good meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Austin. So can you guys just see what is housing first, that slide?
Yep.
Okay, so of course, we all know a little bit about housing, what housing first is. It's immediate access to housing, right? With like little to no preconditions. If you're actively using, we put you in a house and then we work on your substance abuse issue, right? It's about participant choice, self-determination, recovery orientation, and participant-driven supports and services, along with, and I'm gonna try to talk quick, Tisha, because I know that we're making up time here. So, and social and community integration. But that doesn't mean that housing first is a free-for-all, right? It's just a different pathway to housing. We still want the same result in the end. We still want, instead of having to gain sobriety first, then employment, then program participation, then you get a house. We want to get you in a house and then walk you through all of those steps of sobriety, employment, program participation, and self-determination toward a better outcome for yourself and your family, right? So that's kind of how we're operating housing first. And I think that's kind of what the founder, Sam Sabiris, had in mind when he invented Pathways back in the 90s. Not for it to be a free for all, you just drop a person in a house and let them do what they want, because they'll flail. Especially we know people that are substance using, doing sex work or any number of things that are not going to take them in a positive trajectory, right? So that's how we're practicing housing first at the City of Tucson. So programs that are in our housing first division are street outreach. Street outreach. And that started in 2017. That was the first, I don't understand why I have subtitles here, but okay. I stopped that. Sorry about that. So we started with street outreach at the City of Tucson. I was still at Old Pueblo Community Services at that time. Mark, we've done some work together during my time at Old Pueblo, I think. Tom Litwicki, Old Pueblo Community Services, all of that. And I was there for 12 years and ended my time there as the housing director. And the city started their humanitarian services in 2017 with Cliff Wade and Robert Wild back in 2017. That was their first outreach workers. And it was just kind of a trial. Today, we have a project supervisor, 2 community safety navigators, which Cliff and Robert have since moved into, and 2 street outreach workers. So that's expanded greatly. We have 2 navigation people that do our coordinated entry supportive services only navigation. And that's about getting people VI SPDATA'd, which is the Vulnerability Index Service Prioritization Decision Assistance Tool. And that gives us a housing rating, so to speak. So it kind of determines many different things like your chronicity, it determines your disability factors, it determines your many things, your income level, your mental health, your substance use levels, all of that. And it puts it into a score that tells us what kind of housing that you should be. Usually 0 to 4 is no housing intervention, 5 to 8 or 5 to 7 is usually a rapid rehousing intervention, because you have some kind of resource that will get you on your feet quickly and you'll be able to be self-sustaining. 8 and up is permanent supportive housing. And that's a permanent supportive housing program that will provide case management wraparound services for you while you're being subsidized in your rent. So we also operate shelter out of our Housing First Division. We have the Wildcat No-Tell, which is coming to a halt this week to begin the Milagro project, which will be 63 units of affordable housing. We have Inclum and Oracle, which will also become part of the Milagro project, because we have Oracle sitting on the corner of Alturas and Oracle. Then there's a vacant lot, and then No-Tell sits right next to that, next to McGeary's Market, right? So in that center lot as well, we'll start the build. The north facing buildings in No-Tell will come down, and the south buildings on Oracle will come down to accommodate for parking lot space. And those outer lying buildings will remain, since they're historical, and we'll be using those for like community activity rooms, office space, and such for that apartment complex. For our shelter operations, we have 1 project manager. We have 5 permanent staff that are staffed at Wildcat. We have, and we have 6 temps, because we just recently started a project at the Amazon Hotel, which we recently, this slide is not up to date. We're constantly getting new things, right? So we just started at the Amazon, and we have 4 staff that are there that are temps. And that's a loaner to us until they start rehab on it early in 24. And the reason that we utilize these hotels for temporary shelter space is because we found that's a perfect example that's across the street from us from Wildcat. If you leave a hotel vacant, even if you fence it, things are going to happen to your property. So we want to protect our asset and at the same time help our people that are on the streets. So we also have the HEART program, which is recently ramped up, and that consists of 4 HEART navigators and 1 HEART supervisor, and Crowd to Home is the supplement to HEART, which brings us 2 navigators, and that is Arizona Department of Housing Coalition dollars, pass-through funds that we were able to support our HEART team with. So we have 6 navigators altogether and 1 supervisor running that team. And those folks are there to provide case management services to folks in their housing. This is a very new pilot program that the city has launched, because we found that you can't be successful. Like I said, you can't just put somebody in an apartment that has all of these pre-existing things going on: substance use, mental health, DCS involvement, probation involvement, or substance abuse issue of some kind, and expect them to make it without some type of wraparound services and a person checking on them, right, and helping them through their daily living and their life skills. So this pilot project is meant to see how we do there and see if we need to scale that, which we know we do. But this is the proof in the pudding from the city side, right? So the mobile shower program is another program that we started back in January, and we borrowed the Salvation Army truck for that. The Salvation Army shower had 6 showers, 3 on each side. We were only able to use that from January to March because they needed it back to utilize it for their wildfires. The firefighters use it as their shower while the wildfires are going on. So we bought our own, and we finally gotten that, and we just started using it a couple of weeks ago. In the month of July. So that's going pretty good so far. And we have hired 1 person. We're pending a second hire on that. And some of our outreach team is assisting with that right now until we get those people onboarded. Homeless protocol, which surprisingly enough started back in 1978. I just received some really interesting pictures today of some homeless encampments from 78 that were at the base of a mountain. And that's how homeless protocol became a thing, because people didn't want people camping out in their VW bugs. And
Brandy?
Yes.
Who was doing that in 78?
It was the city, but I'm not sure who the person was, right? And so I received the pictures. We're going to try to publish some of those pictures. I'll make them available to you guys too, of people with these pretty intricate rock and wood encampments down by you can see the A in the background. They're at the base making these cool encampments, and the A's in the background of a mountain, and people just didn't want them camping there. You know what I mean? Much different campers, I'm sure, than we have today. I'm sure that, let's see.
1986.
Oh, were you it?
Well, when I ran the Travelers Aid Society, I was the first staff person for TPCH.
Oh, wow.
In 84. And so here's Pat.
Wow.
So I know what was going on in 84. I wasn't paying much attention. I was doing street work with folks with substance use disorders in Phoenix in 77 and 78. So
yeah, I'm going to get the history about it. I'm pretty interested to learn how it went back then, because it's a whole new system now.
So we actually started what I call the first homeless outreach team, straight outreach team in like 86, I think.
Wow.
Travelers Aid. And we were, by the way, putting people in temporary shelter in the Sunland. all those, a number of the same hotels you're now, or motels, motor courts you're now using. So it's
Yeah.
an old model.
Very nice, very nice. I like to hear the history of stuff, Mark. That's pretty cool. Yeah,
Yeah.
very cool. So, yeah, go ahead.
Did you do the 50, were you in the 51 homes team? Did the street count?
I was not in the 51 homes team, but I heard a lot about it because at that time Cliff was working for Old Pueblo and I was working for Old Pueblo. So I heard a lot about that.
And Jeanette Bernal was actually
Yeah.
one of our surveyors. So
Yes, that's very, and Jeanette Bernal is now she's a higher level executive over at Old Pueblo. Yes,
I know.
I did actually volunteer work with Jeanette Bernal when we first started at Old Pueblo. So that's pretty neat. Yeah,
Yeah.
very neat. Yeah, so homeless protocol has really grown. We have an actual homeless encampment coordinator, Elle Milliard, who's dedicated to the dashboard, the homeless protocol dashboard that's run on ArcGIS. And she works really closely with a gal, Jessica Fravor, who is an IT expert at the ArcGIS and helps her with her data pulls and stuff in the background and helps our team immensely with our surveys and streamlining the process with our workforce app that's within ArcGIS. And we have one homeless protocol outreach worker that reports to Elle and one multidisciplinary outreach team outreach worker that also reports to Elle. We have more multidisciplinary outreach team members coming on board. We'll have a nurse practitioner from El Rio and navigation from CBI and OPCS. OFS is no longer going to be in on that. And actually, Madi has since been, Madi used to be the program manager over TC3. And she's since moved into the city manager's office and she started the regional homelessness task force, homeless task force. And so everybody comes to the table for that. We meet with Mike once a week. It's Chief Kazmar, it's Chief Hall, it's Chief the fire chief. There's deputy directors that are all in that from different departments. And we all come together to brainstorm about how we're going to tackle these homeless encampments. And this came about because our first encampment that we did was the Wildcat, or when we got the Wildcat was golf links. As you can see, they're coming back at golf links, and that's the issue, is that we've got to combine enforcement with removal. Once we remove people and we get them into shelter, we've got to go back because we create a vacuum and enforce so that those encampments don't then again rise up. More people will move in and inhabit those areas. So in the first 18, 19 months, Housing First has gone from 4 staff to 31 or 32 now people, and just an incredible in a short amount of time how much we've grown. So outreach is of course an assessment of a vulnerably housed person. We're trying to establish engagement from October 21 through May of October 21 to May of 23. Outreach served 1,017 households. They housed 163. Coordinated entry navigation is housing services and assessment, document collection, things like that, housing applications, that's what they help with. They've served 651 since October of 21 through May 31 of 23 and housed 197 folks. So while they're in shelter, they get medical and mental health care, referral, MAT services, access to mental health, detox, warrant resolution, document collection. As a matter of fact, we did our first community court at Wildcats probably last year, I think in the year 2022. Judge Blue came out and held court in one of our rooms. It was pretty neat. A lot of people came and got warrants quashed and followed through with their court hearings and got into housing eventually. No-tell shelters are going to, well, they were slated to close June 15. We've extended that. They are slated to close Thursday to start the Loud Grow project. And I believe our groundbreaking on that will be in August. Ann Chineka will be sending out that invite to invite people to that groundbreaking. So if you're interested, you may want to reach out to Ann, who is our interim HCD director at this point. Heart and Crowd to Home, we just started there, so I don't have some really good numbers for you. The mobile shower trailer in the first 3 months that we had the Salvation Armies, we served 94 folks, and that was in the coldest winter months. So we're already, I can tell, going to surpass that greatly just on what we've served in the last couple of weeks with the shower trailer. Homeless Protocol, of course, receives the homeless encampment surveys, which are basically complaints from the community. We conduct a harm assessment in that encampment. It's tiered based on tier 1 being an immediate cleanup because there's no people there. Tier 2, meaning the camp is not a threat to the community and it's in a place that's not like right behind somebody's house or business, and they're keeping it clean. So we leave them in place and outreach them from the camp if we don't have shelter available. And a tier 3 is criminal activity. They need to move. We're going to put a 72-hour notice and we're going to get them out and we're going to clean the encampment up. So the multidisciplinary outreach team will assist homeless protocol staff by going out to encampments, doing light wound care, outreach, and navigation into shelter and housing. So throughout all of our programs that are in Housing First in the first 18 months, Housing First permanently housed, leased up 635 participants. That's pretty darn good. Usually the recidivism for that is around 80%. I'd like to see 100. And I think that with some of these other programs, that are going to work with people in their housing, we're going to see a big difference in within the next couple of years. So these are kind of the same numbers, just drawn out a different way. This is something that I find really interesting. Traditional shelters, so Desert Cove is operated by CBI, and it's kind of a traditional shelter in that CBI is more recovery oriented. So, you know, they are a behavioral health agency, and their shelter to housed rate is 11%. At the Wildcat, where we're doing harm reduction and daily activity with these participants in daily hands-on, that shelter to housed is 54%. So that's pretty good for a shelter. So that kind of shows us the difference at a glance of traditional shelter versus shelter that's a little longer and a little more intense on the needs towards getting somebody housed. This is what a participant living space looks like at Wildcat. A normal hotel room. It has a microwave, refrigerator. This participant happened to bring in a toaster oven, which they can do. They just can't burn candles in their room. There's no smoking and no drugging in their room. And if they do that, this is a living space at Notel, a couple of living spaces. People come in and make it their own. And these people are people that have come straight from encampments. So there's a standard. When you come in, you've got to keep your space clean. You've got to keep your space organized. You've got to adhere to our rules. You can't smoke in your room because a kid might come into that room behind you, right? And we don't want the room contaminated. This is a QR code where you can report a homeless encampment. There's a survey that you fill out and a little map, a little pinpoint map that you can pinpoint the location of the encampment on. And we encourage people to report them so that we can start taking care of these proactively and enforcing when we need to. So that concludes my little presentation. Do you guys have some questions? Go ahead.
So La Frontera, I know, used to have the what do they call it over there on Miracle Mile? The low demand. It was you don't know what I'm talking about, and I can't.
Was it shelter?
Yeah, that was in. I don't remember its name.
Was it La Frontera?
Yeah, La Frontera. They got it was
it Sonoran House?
Safe Haven.
Safe Haven, yeah. Safe Haven. So that Safe Haven is a little different than shelter, whereas they can go there in the day and have like a place to cool, a place to chill, a place to maybe shower, a place to charge their phone, a place for resources, stuff like that. But I don't believe, correct me if I'm wrong, someone that may know a little better, Safe Haven is not a place where they spend the night necessarily.
Oh, okay. It originally started that way.
And it was low demand. It was pretty low demand. You couldn't use on site, but you did not have to be sober to be there. And we believe in low demand. You know, we're not judging, but there are standards. You know what I mean? You have to whether we like it or not, there's societal standards that everybody has to live by. It's not acceptable to stand at the bus stop where a 10-year-old might be trying to take the bus and smoke a blue. It's not an acceptable thing. You know, and if you're going to do it in the privacy of your home, be discreet about it. Not only, especially if you have children in the home, number one, that should not be a thing happening. But number two, you have to be a good tenant and a good neighbor. You can't traffic out of your unit. You can't, you know, contaminate your unit so that your neighbors are then suffering because of activities that you're choosing to engage in. If your landlord comes in your apartment after giving you a 24-hour notice that you didn't catch because it's in your mailbox and you didn't check your mailbox, and they see a pipe out, you're going to get a 24-hour crime-free addendum right on the spot. So these are real conversations that we're having with people that are in our shelters all the time, trying to teach them discretion and a way to maintain their housing and then start to work on their recovery.
So what's the relationship between the city's programs and the other shelter programs in the community, like Primavera's, for instance, and the behavioral health agencies? Because I know, you know, 10, 12, I mean, Housing First started basically as an assertive community treatment model. I mean, I was at Sam Zimbaras's first presentation in Arizona many, many years ago, describing that model out of New York. Is there much of a relationship?
There is. I often am in contact with Lisa, believe it or not. She runs Gospel Rescue Mission. And her, Ryan, OCL, all of them always offer beds whenever we're doing an encampment. Sometimes they offer upwards of 30 beds at a time when we're doing a larger encampment. Yoli at Salvation Army works really closely with me. We have a couple of contacts over at Primavera Men's Shelter, and we do exchange people, right? Because they know our services are, even though our services are a little more relaxed, they're a little more intense. So even though we're a Housing First leaning program, we are we're more in touch with our clients on a daily basis than ever. We're checking your rooms a couple of times a day, all the way walk-ins and walkouts for obvious reasons. I don't want somebody in there OD'd and we don't know about it. We're not checking. I don't want somebody hoarding. I don't want somebody building bicycles in their room. You know, we're really careful about all of that. We work really closely with TPD. They can come on site and do paperwork. We always encourage them to take a cruise through. And we like our clients to know it, because we can't do our jobs without the enforcement piece too, right? So DCS workers, we work with DCS workers, case managers, letting them come on site and meet with their clients and do the work with their clients. We do reunification plans right at shelter. So literally we're in collaboration with many different entities, because we don't have the resources at the city to provide people with everything they need. They might need counseling, they might need Sonder care behavioral health services, they might need detox, they might need MAT services. We don't have all of that. So that's how we live. That's how our clients live. We bring in all of those resources from outside. And Pueblo, we're always trying to look for partnering opportunities. Right now, what we're getting ready to ramp up a partnering opportunity with Pima County. So them running their EELS program out of a building that we actually own that'll eventually go into rehab for permanent supportive housing. So we're really trying to do, and that's what Mari's role is. She's the interagency project coordinator on all of this stuff. She's kind of the one that's, we're in an IGA. She works for the city, but we're in an IGA with the county, so she reports to them also. And we do a collaboration. We're about to provide her with 2 navigators for the justice services model, the module down at the Pima County Jail.
At the jail.
So we're really trying to just do this, because that's the only way you can get anything done. Siloing and all of that stuff, it just doesn't work. This doesn't work.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Wendy, do you have any questions for Brandy?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
I don't have anything either. I appreciate it, Brandy. I apologize we didn't have quorum last time and brought you back again, but presentation was fantastic. I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
I don't mind anytime. Let me know.
Very good.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next agenda item is the subcommittee charge or the mission. And what I did notice is that the subcommittees do have various mission statements or goals. Ours does not. And so I went through the commission overview and the mission for each of the subcommittees. Housing segregation has one, and it's in regards to addressing housing segregation. Permanent supportive housing subcommittee has one goal, and that's to provide recommendations on policies to increase or accelerate available permanent supportive housing. And affordable housing subcommittee has 3 goals, one of which is to provide a set of recommendations. So, you know, that kind of being the guide for this conversation, I think it would be a good idea, depending upon what you think, Mark and Wendy, that we do set out at least one goal or some type of statement for the subcommittee, so we're ensured to kind of keep the focus and have a particular outcome for the series of meetings that are to follow. Any thoughts?
My recollection is that this committee has always suffered sort of from a pretty low participation. And at least one of the people that was very instrumental, one of the commissioners in getting it started, ended up leaving town, and so resigned from the commission. So so that may be why you don't see some of that. You're not seeing that sort of charged document, because it just may not have ever come up. So I think it's a great idea. Sorry, I didn't finish that statement.
Great. Wendy, any thoughts? And any thoughts on a particular goal? You know, like I said, mostly the goals are centered around making recommendations or coming up with policy recommendations, recommendations on activities or lever tools that the city might utilize in assisting them. I think, Mark, naturally you brought up one in regards to collaborative efforts, the city with other organizations. Wendy, any thoughts?
So I was actually having a thought sort of in response to Randy's presentation and some of my previous understanding about what Housing First meant. So it seems to me like we may not all be clear on what we mean by Housing First. And that maybe one of the goals / objectives of our subcommittee should be to clarify what we mean by that and feed that information into the commission, and then build on that with some recommendations for how Housing First as a priority can be part of any of the programming that we present. And I think it might also be helpful to, you know, somehow the commission do some outreach to other organizations to kind of bring everybody up to speed on where programs are and what Housing First currently means, because what Brandy described wasn't how I understood it.
Can you expand on that a little bit, Wendy?
Excuse me?
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, so my understanding was that the Housing First approach was sort of evolved from housing programs that had lots of conditions and priorities and consequences for participants. And I understand what Brandy was talking about, the need for wraparound services, but what she described sounded to me like almost going back to the housing with strings because of the I understand the reasoning, but because of the very I can't be more diplomatic than this very intrusive approach that, you know, we work with the police, we work with DCS, we let everybody, you know, we do multiple day inspections because we're trying to protect people from themselves, is how it sounded to me. And I couldn't see if Brandy was still on here. I don't mean to be critical, but that's not how I understood Housing First to be. What I understood Housing First to be was that we have programs that try to create some housing stability, because without stability, people can't address their other needs. So I could be behind the times, I don't know, but that's how I understood it.
Go ahead, Mark.
So Brandy alluded to or mentioned this guy, Sam Simbaris, who came out of New York City, who sort of was the founder and evangelist for Housing First. I made reference to the assertive community treatment teams, which is a very intensive Minnesota-based mental health staffing team, and that Pathways agency in New York had an assertive community treatment team, which is large and very expensive, assigned to 100 housing units in each of the 5 boroughs in New York City. And so it was very much about getting people off of the street and into those units. But again, because they were in New York City, they could move people from, they have the city of New York has a massive amount of housing, and so they kind of could move people around as they had problems in housing units. So, and there were peer support workers, there were psychiatrists, psychiatric nurse practitioners, social workers, vocational specialists, so job placement people, all sorts of folks working with these people, with the folks in that Housing First model. The issue really was in the bad old days when I started in behavioral health back in the 70s, you might show up at my substance abuse treatment program, and we would tell you, well, clearly you seem to have some sort of a mental illness problem. You need to go get that straightened out before we can actually apply recovery services to you. And then when they would go to the mental health services, the mental health agency, people would say, well, you've got to be sober for 30 days before we can put you in a group to talk about your depression or your whatever. And so definitely the early Housing First was about trying to break that down and say, we're not going to create a barrier that says if you have a psychiatric illness, you can't be in our housing. That's a piece of it, and very important. And he started actually doing Housing First stuff through the mental health agencies earlier. I mean, certainly beginning in 2011 through an initiative that called 51 Homes, where the city committed 51 housing vouchers to a street outreach program that was a community-driven collaborative venture. That sort of is a piece of how this all got started. I was at Kodak at the time and actually chaired that venture, the 51 Homes initiative. So it's been around a while longer. I think what's interesting now is the city has clearly, all of that was done with the private nonprofits essentially in the community, and now the city has very much moved into providing easy access, I would say relatively easy access housing or low demand housing in order to help move people off of the streets. So in that sense, it is very much has some of those Housing First components. The question is, where do folks go from there? And my guess is they're very busy right now trying to move people out of the streets, and probably don't have enough beds, enough units to actually provide housing for people. as they're relocating folks. So,
Right, and there definitely is a shortage. If we were to today try to house everyone, there's definitely a deficit. And I know that the county has been working on acquiring those numbers, and I think going to provide that on a regular basis here in the future. Right, so I think, Wendy, some of what I'm hearing too, combined with what Mark is saying, is that we know the shelters are low barrier, but I think Wendy's concerned with the other involvement, plus the rules and regulations, whether they are actually serving as that housing first low barrier model, or if there's a recommendation in which we would have, after we do a little bit of homework, whether we would make a recommendation as to maybe a benchmark being set, and that maybe it's above or below that particular benchmark. Am I on the right path? I think, Wendy, the language you suggested of clarifying what we mean by housing first and then build recommendations based on that. I think that's a good goal. Am I catching that correctly, Wendy?
You were catching it very accurately, because, you know, I'm not uninformed about housing issues. And so my understanding of what housing first meant was not what the program that Brandy described and was calling housing first. And so I think if we're going to talk about recommendations for the city, we need to be clear on what we mean and what best practices are currently. And that model may be it. I'm not saying it isn't. I'm not saying it's terrible. What I'm saying is I'm not sure that it fits what I understood as housing first. And so where does that fit? And, you know, yes, that's the name of our subcommittee, but if we're going to make recommendations to the commission and then to the city, we need to be clear on where best practices are. And my historic understanding was that housing with lots of strings attached to it was not best practices. It was a barrier to people finding and maintaining sustainable housing.
Right. So
I think, excuse me, I think I mean, I do think it's an interesting question about what's the role of the commission in this Housing First subcommittee to what the department is actually doing, and referring to as Housing First. You know, do we have an advisory role there? And I don't think when this Housing First, I don't recall when the Housing First subcommittee was created that there was that clear relationship. I think the city's work has really blown up in the last couple of years. And so what really is the role of the Housing First subcommittee, I guess I would say, related to the charges of the commission and the operation that the city is engaged in, because they're doing what they're doing.
right.
So,
Well, do we think it's within the purview to establish a goal of clarification and building on recommendations of best practices? If we can agree on that, I could come up with some language for the next time that we can review, and then yay or nay or edit that particular goal. And then from there, I think it would be that being the goal, who do we then invite to the subcommittee that might be able to assist with that charge? Establishing some sort of benchmark,
yeah,
or
I mean, the question I would have is whether we ought to be talking with Ann Shineka or, leadership of the department about what really is, what do they see as the role of this subcommittee in terms of how it could help further the work of the department, or maybe we want to tell them they really need to change the work of the department or something like that. But I again, as somebody who's not, this is the first one of these meetings I've been in, so.
Yeah, well, I think we're all on equal footing because this hasn't had a great track record on attendance and meeting quorum. So if we'd like, before we decide on a goal, if we'd like to invite Ann to the next subcommittee meeting and get her input as to the charge of the subcommittee and the city's understanding of the creation of this committee. If it's one, maybe it's one where we're getting updates and then we report back to the commission on the updates. Then the discussion that we're having is completely different than that. But how do you feel about that, Wendy, inviting Ann?
Yeah,
to the next?
I think it's a great idea to invite Ann and get some clarity on what the city's understanding of what Housing First means, because I've heard in several forums that the city is committed to Housing First. Well, we need to be clear on what that means. And then we can look at what the role of our subcommittee is, and if it is Housing First or is it something else?
Okay.
Because I don't want us to be tied to some terminology that we don't have a common understanding of, or some terminology that really doesn't fit what the role of the subcommittee could be in order to be helpful to the commission and board and council. So.
Right. And I think ultimately that's the goal, right? To be helpful to the commission.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and it might just be, we report back on the report back to be helpful to the commission. But okay, let's do that. So, Neto, I think there's agreement on the subcommittee that we're going to put out an invite to Ann for the next subcommittee meeting before we continue the discussion on the charge or mission.
Okay. I would suggest though, Tisha, that you
Reach out to her.
yes, as chair of the subcommittee.
Sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
I'll do that.
And Tisha, if she wants to delegate somebody else, or she wants to just send us a statement of how the city's defined it,
Right.
that would be okay too.
Sure.
Because I know our time is precious.
Right. And what I'll add is, in addition to an understanding, a mutual understanding of Housing First, I think the second question would be the city's thoughts on the goal or the mission behind the creation of the Housing First subcommittee, since it isn't apparent to us like the other subcommittees we do have in writing.
Sounds like a plan.
I would say that Mindy, I believe Mindy was real instrumental in calling for the creation of this subcommittee. Just yeah.
Okay. 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 Well, sounds good. If there's any other discussion, let's have it. If not, I think we might be at a stopping point with an invite for our next subcommittee meeting. Anything further?
I'm good.
Okay, well then I call to
I'm good
adjourn.
too. Thanks, Tisha. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Welcome back, Ernesto.
Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Stay cool.
You too.